Which is why he is so dirty on Sky and calling us BS and all the rest of it. It would appear, Rita, that Dan Andrews is not happy with Sky After Dark.
I didn't think it was appropriate.
Well, poor Dan. It's been rough in retirement. Golf clubs don't want him. He's been taken to task at a gala event where he was there, you know, at the who's who of Melbourne, and now he's just having a tantrum. This is unseemly for a former Victorian Premier, blabbering on about he was just doing what needed to be done and how proud he is of his legacy. I mean, the state is stuffed. We've got the highest debt of any state or territory in the country, yet he seems to be utterly angry, in denial about the angst that he's receiving in retirement.
Let's have a listen to the great dictator Dan himself. Oh, sorry, you can't say dictator. That's Sky After Dark, isn't it, Dan? Of course, none of your behaviour, Dan Andrews, would ever have earned the moniker a dictator. You know, firing on your own people with rubber bullets, tasering them, throwing women to the ground, strangling them, getting women in their pyjamas. No, there's nothing dictatorial about any of that. It's all Sky After Dark's imagination. Still, let's hear from the man himself.
Well, it has been a tough year. We have lost a lot of good people, and I have lost a lot of good friends.
All this nonsense, you know, centralisation of power and, you know, control freakness and all this sort of stuff. This is all bull. Like, you have to have that. Otherwise, you just become listless. You're just adrift.
Doesn't sound very happy, James, does he?
Well, he sounds listless. He sounds listless. He sounds like he's actually gaslighting hugely around securing his record, because you mentioned a few of the things there, Ron. But let's not forget some of the other things. We're talking about the longest lockdowns, some of the longest lockdowns in the entire Western world outside of Wuhan during the pandemic. We are talking about all of the debacles that went along with that. We saw the protests and stuff, which we've seen many times on this show. But hang on, Ed.
Do not interrupt.
And the fact is that they had the worst performance on COVID of any state in the nation, and they were just absolutely proved, you know, our point that we were making all along, that whole approach to COVID was completely wrong. We were right. That's why he hates us.
I didn't think it was appropriate.
And he also just made some absolutely absurd claims about
being Australian.
Us pushing Matthew Guy. We've done nothing but bash Matthew Guy and now John Prosciutto, who's also utterly hopeless. And this is the part of Dan's legacy, that he is seen as this master politician because he won consecutive terms, big landslides, despite having such a terrible beard. Despite having such a terrible record, but it's because he had no opposition. And if you have no opposition, surprise, surprise, you're probably going to do well electorally. And he has, and yet there is this deep disdain for him from so many, including Labor people. And it goes much deeper than the COVID response, which, yes, was uniquely bad. But you look at the state as far as the corruption scandals we've had, any one of them would have seen a premier lose their position in Queensland or New South Wales. This week, we had another report come out from the Ombudsman, Deborah Glass, showing just again the bureaucracy corrupted by politics, too scared to challenge, power being centralised in Dan Andrews' office whilst he was there, and his massive staff numbers. He had more staff than the Prime Minister and the New South Wales Premier combined.
Unbelievable.
Well, they were, you know, those was all of those staff. Much of those staff was about polling, doing focus groups, doing issues management, doing stuff that's not really about the administration of the state, but about the maintenance of the Premier's image.
You know what? Let's just agree to disagree, my friend.
Okay.
And the point here is that he's criticising the media, Sky in particular, and yet during the COVID years, it was only Sky that actually stood up to this character. Peter Credlin did a superb job, and the other reporters, Sky reporters down in Melbourne. But you used to watch those endless, appalling things where Dan and that Brett, whatever his name was, character would get up with all their numbers and things. It was pure scaremongering, fearmongering of the worst sort, intimidating the public, the population, as James said, into the worst COVID response from a government, but also the worst results of any government in the world virtually. And yet none of the media in Victoria would stand up to this character. He had them all under his thumb. All the mainstream media, the ABC, all the rest of them, only Sky stood up to this character, which is why he is so dirty on Sky and calling us BS and all the rest of it. Were it not for Sky, you would literally have a dictatorship in Melbourne during the COVID years. So, Dan, yes, you're right to be angry with Sky because they were the only media to come after you, and boy, they needed to go after you.
That's your civic duty, that's what's most important, and that's what must be done.